Welcome to this brief webinar, Differentiating for the High Ability Learners. My name is Tanya Moret, and I'm an educational consultant at the Capital Area IU. You'll see here that we have 4 learning goals for our short time together, all around the gifted child. Who are they? What do they need? How is service to them changing in Pennsylvania? And what does it really mean to educate the gifted child? We're going to start by talking about what is gifted. And sometimes it's easier to see it through an analogy or a story. Imagine, if you will, during the first 5 or 6 years of school, a child earns good grades and high praise without having to do much of anything. They don't have to make any effort. It just comes naturally. What are all the things that they don't learn that most other children learn by 3rd grade? Think of a couple items, push pause, and when you're done creating a small list, resume the webinar. Does your list include any of these? Does it include not learning how to ask questions when they don't understand something? How to persevere when things get difficult, maybe even fail? How to organize one's time or tasks? How do you decide which is most important? Learning how to focus on the task at hand. Or even not just working by yourself, but working with others and accepting others' ideas as worthy of moving forward. When we think about all the things that our gifted kids miss during those very formative developmental years, is it any wonder why we start to see some of these negative behaviors? Students who don't learn how to learn can eventually put roadblocks up so they don't have to learn, or so they don't have to get found out by adults that, you know what, maybe I'm not so gifted anymore because now all of a sudden things are starting to get hard. We need to make sure that the challenge that we're providing our gifted learners is always appropriate. So what does it mean to be gifted? Anne Marie Roper, who started one of the first gifted schools in the United States, defined the gifted child as one who has a greater awareness, greater sensitivity, and ability to understand and transform perceptions into intellectual and emotional experiences. This definition seems somewhat vague, so the U.S. Department of Ed helps us out a little bit. They recognize 5 domains of giftedness. The first one, general intellectual ability, is really probably what we are most familiar with here in Pennsylvania. The identification process in Pennsylvania first looks at the IQ to determine what a student's potential for learning is, and focuses on the verbal and nonverbal performance that translates into how a student learns new material in an academic setting. We have just, I'd say fairly recently, accepted this idea that students don't have to be gifted in all academic areas, that you can have a student who's only gifted in one domain, one specific academic area. And they can manifest like a specialist who has an insatiable desire to learn everything they can about a topic. We do not, however, in Pennsylvania, identify creative productive, psychosocial leadership, or visual performing arts gifted students. Creative productive, obviously that flexible thinker who can handle abstract thought and vagueness, who is a risk taker. We identify the fact that gifted children should be nurtured in this area, but we don't identify a creatively gifted child. Same way with leadership, we recognize that it's an important trait to nurture in a gifted child, but we don't identify someone as gifted in leadership and write a goal for them. But we know we have those kids who just have a way of rallying the troops, so to speak, have a way of setting their mind on an end target and making it happen and getting all the people to line up in the right spot on the bus in order to get the job done. We do not identify for talent in Pennsylvania. In fact, talent does not appear anywhere in Chapter 16. But the U.S. Department of Ed does recognize students can be gifted in the visual or performing arts, which is what we would refer to as talent. So those are our gifted musicians and artists and dancers and athletes. But there are already quite a few opportunities for students gifted in those areas that are part of our public school system, that talented students in those areas are getting their needs met to some degree. Jim Delisle takes it one step further. He talks about pairing these 5 domains of giftedness with 5 intensities. And they include intensity of thought, the student whose mind is always going, asking a million questions and making connections, or intensity of purpose, the student who, once his mind is made up, he will do nothing to stop at getting the job done. Or intensity of emotion, that student that just feels everything much more intensely or strongly. They are affected by colors and sounds and people and all kinds of things. You also have intensity of spirit. Those are our souls out there, our students out there who are committed to service and always looking to help those less fortunate. And then the last intensity is intensity of soul. And these are our philosophers, our deep thinkers who are, asking some of those hard life questions. So if you take the 5 domains of giftedness, and a student, even though in Pennsylvania we only recognize general and specific academic ability, we know that gifted students have some of the other traits. And you mix them with the intensities. And it doesn't have to be just one. It can be multiple intensities in all kinds of arrangements or in all kinds of mixes. What you really get is that gifted child that fits the definition by Anne-Marie Roper. We don't always know how to quantify it, but we sure know it when we see it. In Pennsylvania, identifying a gifted student is more than about a number. It's also looking at the multiple criteria. What else is telling us that this student needs and craves that challenge and that opportunity to learn, that's insatiable and is making the connections to what they learn to other experiences? That is a gifted child. Now that we've identified what is a gifted child, we want to kind of look closely at what kind of teacher do gifted children need or want to learn from. Here is your first assignment. When you're done with the hearing about the assignment, I want you to push pause or stop on the webinar. You will write your answer to this question in a Word document and upload it in the Edmodo platform under Assignment 1. What would you observe or hear from the teacher or from the students that would make you believe you're in the presence of the kind of teacher who's best suited for gifted students? And I don't want you thinking specifically, what should a gifted support teacher be like? Because our gifted students spend more time away from a gifted support teacher than they do with. So I want you to kind of broaden your perspective. Doesn't matter what room you walk into, how do you know you are in the presence of someone who gets gifted children and is good for gifted children? Please complete that assignment, upload it, and then when you're done, come back to the presentation. What follows is a list that was compiled by Karen Rogers in her book Reforming Gifted Education, where she went right to the source. She asked gifted students, what kind of things do you want to see in a teacher? And they resoundingly answered, well, first of all, we want a teacher who's intelligent. and someone who demonstrates that intelligence through the vocabulary and language that they use. And also a high degree of intellectual honesty. Teachers who say things like, "You should know that you're gifted," should be avoided at all costs. And it should be okay for a teacher to say, "I don't know the answer to that." Gifted students appreciate when a teacher demonstrates an expertise in a specific academic area, because often they will gravitate towards one particular topic and learn everything they can about it. And so they appreciate knowing that an adult also appreciates the time and intensity that it takes to learn in depth about a particular area. They also appreciate someone who genuinely likes gifted learners and is interested in how they work. A gifted learner can sometimes question or challenge, and adults have to resist the urge to feel threatened. That's not a challenge to a teacher's intelligence, but rather an opportunity for them to develop their thinking, especially out loud. I also appreciate when a teacher recognizes the importance of intellectual development, that they have and that it's not always a gimme, that they build self-esteem through the successes that are a product of hard work, and not just always lavishing praise that's unwarranted or unearned. They like teachers who appreciate and believe in the individual differences among students, especially gifted students. As we talked about at the beginning of this webinar, no two gifted students are the same. So they don't want to be generalized. They don't want teachers generalizing about them. And in order to do that, they have to have a highly developed knowledge of pedagogy. They have to know how to be really good teachers and be able to assess and evaluate students fairly and give instruction where the child needs it and challenge them appropriately. I like teachers who are self-directed learners, who are joining them in this journey to become better students. And our gifted students often are products of asynchronous development. They tend to advance their intellectual age at a much faster rate than, let's say, their emotional age. And that asynchronous development can create drama and instability in a classroom. So we need teachers who can recognize that, but still maintain a very emotionally stable classroom and are very level-headed. We just kind of looked at what do gifted children need in terms of the instructor that's teaching them. But the emphasis in Pennsylvania is really to meet a gifted child's academic needs. And so how those academic needs are met is actually changing. A very traditional form has been to provide gifted students with a program. But we already talked about the fact that no two gifted students are alike. So why do we think that a cookie cutter program or one size fits all would really work to meet their needs? So how do we meet the very different academic needs of our students? It can be a somewhat daunting task to think that for every child that walks into our classroom, there's a different degree of need. So how do we meet the needs of all of our students better? And one answer has been, and continues to be, through a response to instruction and intervention framework, affectionately referred to as RTII. And so we need to do a better job of meeting the needs of our advanced learners in the core through what we call Tier 1 instruction, because there are most definitely students sitting in our classrooms who aren't identified gifted but need more than what we're currently providing at grade level. And so if you think about the support that we can provide, the place where students can get the most day-to-day support would be in the classroom at a Tier 1 level. And what that looks like is just good differentiated instruction. Teachers who are regularly assessing and evaluating students and filling in the gaps or providing more challenge in the areas in where they demonstrate they have already achieved. And you can see here there's a long list of things that can happen in Tier 1, in the core, pre-assessing students and making a decision as to whether or not you provide a compacted unit. If that unit is such that they're learning or they're applying information independently, perhaps they write an independent learning contract. If we're cluster grouping students, it's likely that there will be multiple students in that room who need something different. Or maybe through flexible grouping, students may need something more one unit and not the next. And what that something more might be will be received better, and students will be more inclined to do it if they have some choice. So we provide those opportunities through activity menus. And the great time to allow students to differentiate is through our guided reading, during guided reading time, or that small group instruction of guided reading, when students are working in learning centers. We're even instituting that in math, the guided math, when teachers are working in small groups working with small groups of students, other students are working independently or as partners. That would be an opportunity or an opportune time for students to be differentiated or receiving differentiated assignments. This is not something necessarily that teachers are ready to hit the ground running doing. They need professional development. They need support from the gifted support teacher who's helping them find resources and write tasks and manage this, and maybe even sometimes taking a group out of the classroom in order to give them more space to work on a particular enrichment task. But when this is really working at its optimal level, a student who is advanced doesn't need to be gifted in order to be enriched. They're getting that good instruction at their level on a much more regular basis. But for some students, that's not enough. They need a little bit more. They need a little more than just the differentiation. They may need to have acceleration in addition to those opportunities to be enriched. In which case they might need to be in an above grade level course and receiving their instruction in a particular content area from a completely different teacher. Or they might need accelerated reading sources, which can be done in the current grade level, but then the teacher would just be using the grade level skills, the comprehension skills, with above level resources. Again, the gifted support teacher would be there to help and guide and facilitate all of this. And then we have students who need a lot of support. And by a lot of support, I do mean a lot of challenge, and a challenge that is not easily scheduled. Maybe a student who needs acceleration in multiple subjects or even a whole grade, or a student who, because of their learning style, really can't be set to work independently, needs to have more adult interaction and more opportunity for direct instruction from an adult. So when you think about meeting the needs of our gifted students, the support that they need is really individualized and based on their unique learning needs, learning styles, and strengths. And it can occur in any of the 3 tiers. So what does gifted education look like? In Pennsylvania, according to Chapter 16, we have 3 options: acceleration, enrichment, or a combination of both. And it's a service, not a place. And the best way I know of to explain it is to think in terms of the classroom teacher and where the student is in relationship to grade level expectations. We automatically place every single student in a cohort of kids based on their birth date. And that cohort travels from year to year, and the expectations that they're held to are really primarily based on when they were born. But you know, when you have that group of students sitting in front of you, that you have some students who are ready for your instruction, some who aren't as ready, and some who have already achieved what you're going to teach them and are ready for more. So when you think about gifted education specifically, we're thinking about those students who are sitting in your classroom and really already past the point at which you're starting your instruction. And those are students who are no more than 1 year above grade level. You know, a teacher really needs to know 3 years worth of standards in order to properly differentiate for her students or his students. They need to know about the grade level of instruction preceding when they receive these students. So if there are gaps in the student's knowledge, they know how to fill in those gaps. They also need to know about the grade level above where they teach, because if you're growing students and some of them are already at your entry point of instruction, you need to know where you're growing them to. You have to have a target. And so the first kind of gifted support really that we talk about really isn't gifted support. It is just good teaching. It's enrichment against grade level standards. So what's chapter 16 say? How enrichment is defined. In the guidelines it says, in-depth learning experiences that provide interaction with new ideas, skills, and topics that enhance the curriculum. Now, and these experiences are based upon individual student strengths, interests, and needs. When I read the first part of that definition, I'm reminded of learning-focused schools that promoted Marzano's research that said there are 5 top strategies that increase student achievement, and of those 5 strategies, the number 1 strategy that increases student achievement is extended learning. When I think about what is extended learning, it is really in-depth learning experiences that provide for interaction with new ideas, skills, and topics that enhance or grow the curriculum. It's the application of new knowledge and skills in the content area to a higher level, those higher order thinking skills. So really, all students should be receiving enrichment. The difference for gifted students is that their enrichment needs to take into consideration their individual strengths, interests, and needs based on those strengths. But really, enrichment, by any other name, we might call it enduring understanding, which is what Wiggins and McTighe call their third level of learning. We might call them 21st century skills, the ability to communicate and collaborate. The LFS calls it extended learning. We're learning a new terminology, Webb's depth of knowledge. If you look at strategic and complex thinking, levels 3 and 4, Bill Daggett even got involved in, well, not got involved, but he has a term for this type of learning. It's learning that's based on rigor and relevance, or authentic learning experiences, real-world applications. Doesn't matter what you call it. By any other name, it's really enrichment. So enrichment is something that, as classroom teachers, we are or should already be doing. But in terms of a gifted student, we absolutely need to make sure it's happening, and we need to be taking into consideration some of their unique learning strengths. So that's for the student who is working at about 1 year above grade level. But we know that we have students who are working at more than a year above grade level. And that is where acceleration comes in. Traditionally, acceleration has been considered to be whole grade skipping, but really, acceleration takes a lot of different forms. What you see here is a list of all the different types of acceleration that are available and the effect size that those types of acceleration strategies have been found to have on students. We say that an effect size of 0.5 is really kind of like a 50-50 chance that it will have an impact on the student. But anything 0.6 or higher is statistically significant and would tell us that that would be a good strategy to use with our students. You'll see advanced placement courses on here actually have an effect size of 0.27. That's pretty low. But you've heard of grade skipping. Early entrance to school is one of the higher, although statistically significant forms. Subject acceleration, so moving students along the continuum of a particular subject. Grade telescoping, which is where you really increase the pace. Instead of giving a student a pre-assessment and then during the time when the rest of the class is learning the unit information, they're doing an enrichment activity or task. Grade telescoping would say, why do they have to do the enrichment activity? Why not just then teach whatever gaps are in their knowledge and pre-assess them on the next unit? Find where their gaps are, teach them, go on to the next unit, so that you can actually get maybe 2 years of instruction done in 1 year of schooling. Concurrent enrollment is where you have students who are enrolled in both maybe middle school and high school courses at the same time, or enrolled in high school and college courses at the same time. Early admission to college is really a little different from concurrent enrollment in that students actually graduate from high school and start college early. Credit by examination is what, we're really talking about with the Keystones in the high school. Students who don't have to take the course but can take the Keystone exam and score proficient and not have to take the course, they actually get credit for their graduation by just taking the test. The number one strategy, though, in acceleration is really a combination of acceleration and enrichment, and that is the compacting the curriculum that we've already kind of talked about. So we've talked about providing enrichment at grade level. We've talked about acceleration for students who are more than a year above. But if we're going to generalize about a gifted student, I would say the next statement is probably the most likely accurate generalizing statement, and that is that most gifted students or advanced learners fall in between. They might need enrichment in some areas and acceleration in others. They may need to be accelerated, and because they're accelerated and learn at a fast pace, they still need enrichment at that accelerated level. This is probably more realistic of what a gifted child needs, and that balance between enrichment and acceleration is really based on their individual strengths. So we've kind of talked about this gifted student who is learning at a faster pace on a more comprehensive level. We've talked about the fact that they're gifted all the time, and that their support that they need in order to continue learning may vary from student to student, and that if we're doing our jobs well, we can provide a lot of that support in Tier 1 with good differentiated instruction. And we've talked a little bit about the fact that the supports for our gifted students are going to take the form of either enrichment, acceleration, or a combination of the both. So thinking about all of that, where do you see yourself? As in, what is your role in educating a gifted child? They're in your classrooms. In fact, in some cases, they are clustered in your classrooms. I want you to think about what is it that you first of all, bring to the classroom? What are the strengths that you bring to the classroom to meet the needs, the learning and the social emotional needs of a gifted student? And also, what kinds of academic things do you see yourself doing or should be doing in order to meet their needs? This brings us to the last assignment, where you are going to think about everything you've learned and answer that question in a letter. I want you to write a letter kind of explaining where you see your role now as a cluster teacher or a teacher of the gifted in the general education setting. When you're done, you can simply upload the assignment. When we get together on September 19th, I'm going to ask you to bring with you materials, curricular materials, that you're going to be using to teach a unit, not the current one you're in, but either the next unit or one later in the year, maybe in November. Because when we're together for those 3 hours, we are going to create an enrichment task. And I want you to have everything you might need in order to do that. See you on September 19th.